Well, welcome back to Focus today, and we have now just concluded the latest legislative session up in Salem, and we've got the most connected man up there who is on Skype with us today. Scott Jorgensen is with us. We kind of debrief him every now and then to find out just what's going on with the legislature. Now we're going to kind of do a wrap-up. Scott is a legislative staffer, an author, a former reporter, and the session is over, and it actually, didn't it end a few hours earlier than what had been scheduled?
Well, I mean, we were fully prepared to go all day today and through Saturday and Sunday if need be, but a deal was struck and we were able to get out fairly early yesterday.
Now, I know that there were, about 400 plus proposals that were being looked at. Do you have any? I'm not sure that you kept track of all of those, but do you know how many were passed? Because I know a lot of legislators were saying this is just overkill. This is way too much. Do you know, can you give us a summary of how much was accomplished this session in the number of bills?
No, I don't know that off the top of my head, but what I can say is that some of the bills that were passed were very complex and had limited public input because of the nature of the short session, and it definitely disadvantages people from Southern Oregon and the other rural parts of the state, especially once the committees went to 1 hour notice. It's physically impossible for somebody from Medford to get from there to Salem in the space of 1 hour, but it advantages all the professional paid lobbyists that are here in the building anyway.
Yeah, and I know that was part of the complaints, is just that it was overkill. It was just really swamped with too much. Do you think some of what was passed will have to be changed because of that in the next session at all?
Well, I would certainly hope so. And the big theme of this session was give me what I want or else, because prior to the start of the session, some liberal special interest groups put together some money and started doing signature, petition drives to put some measures on the ballot in November. And they were essentially saying, we can either have it out at the ballot box or we can do this legislatively. And then some of the Democrats in the building said, okay, well, here's my counter proposal. It doesn't go as far as this one. This is my compromise version. But I really think that the people of the state would have been a lot better off had they gotten to vote on some of these measures. And I'm not entirely convinced that some of these measures would have passed at the ballot box.
Oh, really interesting. Well, let's talk about a few of them. The affordable housing package kind of came out. Describe, give kind of a summary of what's included in that.
Inclusionary zoning was a big issue, and essentially what's happened is that the same land use policies that have crippled rural Oregon's economy for decades is now starting to affect folks in the Portland area because housing is becoming unaffordable. In fact, my rent keeps going up and up and up to rent an apartment in Wilsonville. It's just outrageous. I mean, I pay almost twice what I did to rent a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house down there years ago. And the inclusionary zoning bill started off as somewhat punitive, but they ended up making it more incentive. It became more carrot than stick after a while. So that was a big part of it.
And who will benefit from this the most, do you think?
Well, hopefully the people that are struggling to pay their rent right now, because that has become a really big deal around here. Although I do think that there is growing recognition of the fact that housing is becoming unaffordable in the Portland area because Metro refuses to expand the urban growth boundary, which means that it's basically against the law to build a house on most of the land in the state.
Now, we also had an energy bill, and I talked to a representative from Pacific Power yesterday, and they said, they have over 67% of their power comes from coal, and within, 14 years, it's going to be down to zero, and they're going to have to use other forms of power to take its place. He didn't seem to think that would be a problem. I was a little surprised because I'm thinking that's a huge sea change for any kind of electric power company to do that. Does this bill seem to be a doable aspect of eliminating coal completely by, 2030, I believe it is?
This is one of the worst bills I've ever seen. And Pacific Power is okay with it because under law, they're guaranteed this phrase called prudently incurred costs. Because these companies are basically monopolies, they can take their cost of doing business and pass it on to ratepayers, and then they're guaranteed a profit on top of it. And I really think, the Public Utility Commission, which is the body that advocates for ratepayers, they were outraged about this. And Governor Brown tried to muzzle those guys about this bill. And I think the more people found out about it, the more questions they had about it. So I'm not convinced that this bill would have passed at the ballot box, because ultimately you're going to have your utility rates go up 40%. It's going to make no measurable impact on carbon emissions whatsoever. So there's really no upside. And as it is, our only coal-fired plant, Boardman, is scheduled to close anyway. But they built enough kind of escape hatches into the bill to where they can still use coal sources if they want to. But there's ultimately, that's what this bill is going to result in, is higher utility rates for working Oregonians. And no upside.
How soon do you suppose we'll see that reflected?
Well, I imagine that you'll have the typical timeline of the governor signs the bill and the bill takes effect. It's not quite like the minimum wage bill, which I think if somebody were to challenge it in court on a couple of fronts, they would certainly have grounds to do so. But yeah, to me, this was, and this is another example. For the longest time, we had the Oregon Way, which was open and transparent processes with lots of public input. And this is how we've done business for decades in this state, and it's worked well for the people. But what you have now is deals like this, where it's all worked out behind closed doors with a handful of people and without very much public input. And it's a done deal by the time it even gets here. So if this is our new way of doing things, then I think the people of the state should be very concerned about that.
Well, I would imagine that if people see their rates going up 40% in electricity, they're going to start kind of yelling and screaming about that. Is that anticipated at all from what you can tell? Because that's going to talk about, I mean, it's rather ironic. You have the affordable housing package for people to keep their rates down, and then for housing, and then electric rates are going to go up this significantly. I mean, it seems to be two plans working at opposite ends of each other.
Well, exactly. And, the same with the minimum wage bill, because at the end of the day, every impartial analysis of it said that long term it's going to increase poverty.
Explain that a little bit, because, well, first of all, the minimum wage bill, this is going to cause Oregon to have the highest minimum wage of any other state in the entire nation. And it started as a three-tiered system. Did it end up as two? Is that correct? A two-tiered system?
No, it's still a three-tiered system. And the state constitution states very clearly that every law must apply equally to everybody.
So how did that even get passed with that law? That seems pretty clear and obvious.
Well, once again, it was a matter of give us what we want or else, because the unions had a couple of different ballot measures, one of which would have done $15 an hour statewide. The other would have done $13.50 an hour in graduated steps statewide. And apparently the $13.50 measure polled decently, and I could understand why. But the higher up you get with it, the more support that you lose, because anyone that's making between minimum wage and $15 an hour, I think probably realizes that they're getting a raw deal out of this.
Do you think because of the problem, as you mentioned, that it's supposed to affect everybody evenly, and it clearly won't, this will be challenged?
Yes, and the Lynn County Board of Commissioners had gotten a legal opinion that said essentially that it is an unfunded mandate on counties. So I think that's another grounds for a lawsuit there.
Any idea how soon that kind of a thing would take place? I mean, going through the court system and all, is this something that could take a long time to see the light of day?
Oh, it usually does. The governor just signed that into law, in the last couple of days. So we'll see where it goes from here.
I saw one of the headlines in the Oregon Live website, which I thought, well, this is interesting. It indicated that Republicans and Democrats finally at the end all kind of got together and had a group hug. Everything was fine, and the battles were put aside. And I thought, that's not what, from talking to some legislators, that's not what we saw reflected down here. Give a feel of that tenor. Did they patch things up, or is there still some raw sores, do you think, as a result of the way this session went?
It's not kumbaya by any stretch of the imagination here. And this was easily the most partisan session that I've ever participated in. And I've been here as a member of the majority, the minority, the super minority, and even as a newspaper reporter. And I've never seen it be this bad. I mean, the atmosphere was definitely toxic every step of the way.
Is there any way other than, I suppose, the election would be to have more equal Democrats and Republicans together? Is that the solution to cause this to work better, do you think?
Yeah, and I think it'll probably cause us to revisit these short sessions and what they were supposed to be about, because the ballot measure in 2010 that voters approved that made it possible, it was sold to voters as, oh, we're just going to make budgetary adjustments and technical fixes and things like that. But instead, it's become extremely politicized. And we didn't do any budgetary adjustments. And the fact of the matter is, this state is heading to a fiscal cliff of epic proportions, and I don't think most people realize that. The Oregon Health Authority, Department of Human Services, Department of Transportation, then you've got the PERS. So we're going to need to come up with literally billions of dollars next biennium. The 2017 session is going to be ugly.
Do you think that they will be taking that challenge to solve some of those then, or is that a little too optimistic?
Well, I think they're going to have to, but hopefully we'll have more conservative legislators in the building and people who actually have run businesses who are aware of the impact that some of these measures have on people that run businesses.
And that only happens by people voting in more of an equal number then, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm encouraged because I look at the turnout figures for the primary elections that are happening statewide, and you can tell that there's an enthusiasm gap. That only changes if Bernie Sanders somehow gets the Democratic nomination, which I don't think is going to happen. That a lot of Democratic voters would probably hold their nose and vote for Hillary Clinton, but that's quite different than the enthusiasm that they had for Barack Obama the last two presidential elections. So you can already tell that there's an enthusiasm gap out there and that it's working in the favor of the Republicans right now.
Oh, so what we're seeing on the national then, you're thinking could be reflected locally in the next election for our own statewide jobs?
Well, I would think so, because the top of the ticket matters, and then we've also got some other races, like the governor's office, and I think Alan Alley is expected to announce on Monday that he's running for governor. I know Alan, I have for years. He would do an excellent job. He would actually run these agencies well. You've also got Secretary of State, where you've got my former boss and longtime friend Dennis Richardson running, along with Lane County Commissioner Sid Lyken. So either way there, we're going to have strong candidates. For state treasurer, we've got Lake Oswego City Councilor Jeff Goodman, who has a really good background in terms of private sector, public sector, and nonprofits. So, and we've also got a lot of candidates running for U.S. Senate, including Lane County Commissioner Faye Stewart, who would be a great candidate. So I think that hopefully we get a good candidate for Attorney General as well. But it's looking like candidate recruitment, especially for a lot of the House seats and the ones that are going to be contested, has gone pretty well, better than it has in the last couple of cycles. In fact, filing day is on Tuesday, and so we'll definitely have a better feel by the end of Tuesday of what the competitive races are going to be statewide. And we've got a couple of good pickup opportunities here in the Senate this cycle, so we're definitely feeling optimistic right now.
Well, next week we should have a clearer picture then. Appreciate that. We've been talking with Scott Jorgensen. He's a legislative staffer, an author, and a former reporter on what's happened this legislative session. Thanks for letting us have these weekly updates for the last month or so. Appreciate it, Scott.
Well, whatever I can do to help.
All right. And coming up, we're going to be talking to John Mittendorf a little bit about the pyramids, things you may not know about, coming up on Focus Today.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.